Okay, welcome to HTML. All you need to know. This is a quick crash course on all of the things you need to know about HTML. Now, this won't be an hour-long class. This is going to be about 80% of what you need to know with HTML. The most important things, because if you want to become a web developer, you're only going to be using core elements in HTML. And the truth is, HTML really just the building blocks. Most of the work is going to be done in CSS, which is styling things, making things look much better, and also using JavaScript to make things more interactive and creating functions. But for now, let's just get right into what are some of the core HTML elements. So every single web page is built using HTML. Every single page, the browser understands HTML. So even if things are coded, eventually what comes on the page is HTML. HTML consists of a series of elements, and the browser interprets those elements and displays whatever's in the elements. So in order to start with a page, we first need to create a template of an HTML page. So let's look at that right now. On the left side, I have my code editor open, which you can use Visual Studio. On the right side, I have my browser open. So what you'll see is as I code, you'll see on the right side, it reflects. So let's look right into this. And now we have index.html, create any page you want, call it whatever you want. First thing you need to do is have this declaration, doc type, which just tells the browser this is an HTML element. Now you need to actually create the HTML. So it consists of first an HTML tag. And HTML consists of a series of elements, and almost every element is an open and closed tag. So it has to open and close, and then the content goes in between. Now, there are some elements that are called self-enclosed elements, which you'll see later, like image tags and things like that. But most elements have to be open and closed. So this tag just specifies it's the HTML. Then there's the head tag. And in this head tag, this is not where you write the content that goes on the web page. This is where you're going to put scripts, includes other declarations, the background SEO title and things like that, Google Analytics and things like that. So you can leave this empty for now. Here's where most of the hardcore HTML goes. It's in the body tag. So you see open body tag, close body tag. So now we could start. Let's take a look. So if I write in this body, hello world, you'll see right on the right side here, you'll see that the hello world gets open. Right there, you see the text. Now, that's pretty much the core of any HTML page. That's exactly all that you need to know in terms of what loads the page. Now, what else happens here? HTML has a bunch of elements that specify different meanings. But essentially, mostly everything is going to be styled with CSS, which is in another course. But for right now, you just have to know that there are different elements. So here we are with just text. The next elements that are really important are H tags, which are heading tags. So H1, for example, will say hello world. Another one, I'll delete this one. And what you'll see is what this means is that typically this is a heading. This is what the browser will understand as what should be resembled as a heading of something. Now, HTML has a series of H1, H2, all the way up to H6 to represent a hierarchy of text. And this is important, very also for accessibility. And you see here it's creating a hierarchy. And this is what tells the browser, like, what's the most important, what's the second most important, third most important line. And these are things that, the web developer is going to specify. Like, okay, if this is a main title of a page, it should have an H1 tag. If it's secondary, it'll have H2. It goes all the way up to H4, up to H6. But essentially, they all do the same thing and have a specific hierarchy. The next tag is the P tag, which is the paragraph tag. So this is where you want to write out text. I went to the store and bought milk. So you see here, this is a P tag. This is where you want to specify paragraphs of text. So you could keep writing and writing and writing, and it'll keep going. Now, another tag in between here, and this is the self-enclosed tag, is the BR tag, which is, so if you keep writing another line, here's another line. You see that it stays together. But if you want to have break that up, there's another tag called BR, which will drop, which will create what's called a line break. Now, you can do all of these things. You can do much more fancier things using CSS, which is what styles HTML. But again, that's in another course. But HTML itself has some specific things it can do for you. So the BR tag will create a line break. and that's nice to have. That's the p tag. So that's where you want to specify text. If you move on here, the other tag that I love is the image tag, which is one of the most prominent tags. And you see here, when you write the image tag, again, it's another self-enclosed tag. Doesn't need to open or close. You'll see here it has what are called attributes. So every HTML element can have attributes. So the image tag has src, alt, and again, that specifies further attributes related to the element. And there's only a few of them. So for image, it's the source. So what do you think goes in the source? Think about it. It's an image and it needs to display. The source, it needs the link to the image. So I'm just going to grab one from, let's say, Unsplash, just to show you how this works. I'm just going to grab any old, image URL here. Let's grab this one. I'll copy the image address and I'll paste it right over here. And you see here, the image loads, and it's super huge because the image is really, really large. And that's where you get the width and height tag. So you can actually add a width and say, you know what, make it 400 pixels. And you see it got much smaller, and the height became auto. Now, if you do specify height, you'll lose the aspect ratio here. So there are other ways to make things smaller and specify widths and heights using CSS where you don't break the aspect ratio. But with just HTML, you just want to specify the width here. The alt tag is going to be wallpaper image. And this is for more so SEO purposes. So this doesn't show. This is just hidden. If you inspect this element, you'll see, that it has the alt tag, the wallpaper image. So this is for in case, which is in a very rare circumstance, the image doesn't load, the browser knows what is happening there. Again, it's very rare, but it's also important for SEO purposes. So it tells the search engines, like, this is what this, because, the search engines don't know how to read images per se, say what is in the image. So the alt tag specifies what's in the image. So it's pretty important for SEO purposes as well as accessibility. So there you have it. That's the image tag. Pretty cool, pretty important. If you want to make this smaller, it goes here. Again, if you want to make this, you could do much more interesting things with images using CSS, and that's something we'll look at in another course. Now, the next cool thing are A tags. So A tag are links. Which is one of the most important elements in HTML, is actually linking, because the web wouldn't exist without these links, because that's how things are, interacting with each other across the web. So let's say we say here, it's an A tag and it has an attribute of href, and that's where you specify where you're linking to. So inside the body, you'll specify the title, the thing that you're just the text of what you want to link to. Now that goes nowhere because it's pretty much a broken link. It doesn't have any tag. It doesn't have any value here. So let's place a value. So we can say https google.com. Save this, click here, and I'm off to Google. Got a little promo thing there. So there I am, off to Google. So that's important. That can go anywhere. That can go to, TikTok, Instagram, wherever it needs to go, or whatever you need to do. So that is an A tag. It's pretty cool. The most important element, I think, in all of HTML. After that, you have what are called list elements. Where you want to create lists of things. So let's say you're making a bulleted list. Let's say there's a navigation. You want to use UL LI. UL specifies the list. LI is the bulleted item in the list. So we will say hello. And you see there's a bullet. Keep adding. You see multiple bullets. So that just makes a bulleted list. Again, they look like bullets, but now if you see all of these elements and what they look like, you might say, well, do they have to look like that? And can I make things look cooler? How do I move things around? All that stuff and all the layout features are going to come with, again, as I mentioned, is the CSS. That's where you're going to style things. So you really just want to look at HTML as core building blocks of what makes up a web page, and realize that you'll need to study CSS to make things look much, more pretty, and controlling how whatever it is you want it to look like. So that's the UL LI tag. really important tag. And these tags are really important also for accessibility because they specify to the browser for people who have certain disabilities, who let's say they can't see, they can't do certain things on the computer. They can use accessibility readers that read the HTML and tell them, oh, this is a list, this is an image, this is something that the person can't necessarily see. So it's also really, really important for accessibility. So that's the ULLI tag. These are some of the probably most, we're almost at 60% of most of what needs to be, done in HTML. You also have tables. Tables aren't used as much, but they're important for email. Tables are still used for email, so it's good to just understand them and know what they how they function. So again, it's just a table tab, a table element tag, and then tables are just sort of a list, boxes that go together. It's basically like rows and columns. So here you would specify tr, td. So again, you can see these side by side. They're just a table, of boxes, columns, and then what I missed here is what you can have is T head. So basically, there's like a heading, like almost like an Excel kind of thing, where you have a head, and then the body, and then you also have columns again. Now, as you see, it's just, if you look here, as this is created, it's a series of 2 rows, right? 1 row, the TR specifies the row, the TD specifies the column. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of the web really early on used to be built on tables because if you see here, what HTML, what the browser does, it really just stacks all elements. So it's pretty much responsive from the get-go, is that it just stacks all of these HTML elements. It doesn't do anything with it, right? Like, what if you want this hello world to go over here? You want this to go over here. Again, all that is done with CSS. That's how you move things around. But before things got really, sophisticated in the primitive days, people were just using tables, to kind of lay things out. But now you have way more sophisticated ways to lay things out, and no one is laying out a web page with a table, except emails. Tables are still used for some strange reason as like the email standard. So they're definitely good to just know. So those are tables. The next kind of, set of things that you should know are semantic elements that don't really do anything per se in the display. They're more what's called semantic. They're just like wordy elements that tell the browser what the content represents. So header, for example, is just a header tag that you can basically put anything in here. Again, this is just a tag. And what's awesome about HTML, if I haven't mentioned, is that you can nest and nest and nest, right? For the most part. I mean, there are certain limitations, but you can pretty much nest most of the elements amongst each other. So header is going to represent sort of like a whole section that should represent the top of a web page. What's the thing that is, what's being presented. And in here, you can have, whatever you want. You can have the H1 tag, hello world. This is the header. Again, so I would move this up here. I'm just demonstrating, but generally the header would go up top and represent whatever it should represent, right? Telling the browser this is the most important information. Then you have article, another semantic tag, which just represents a piece of content, an article, something that is there, something that should be referenced. Similar to article, you have section, which again represents a section of a web page. And a lot of these can be somewhat subjective. A lot of web developers use them subjectively, but they are at your leisure to use them as you want. They'll have those specific representations. So section will do that. Nav will be a representation telling the browser that this is a navigational element. So in this case, you usually want to have a navigational element. This is where you're going to put links. Typically, you'll have somewhat of a ULLI bulleted list here, link 1, and then you want to have in here a tag, to represent the link. So you can see here, it's a UL representing the bullet list, LI is a bullet, and then again, a further nest of the a tag, and then the link 1. If you look up here, you can see link 1. If I duplicate this, this will be link 2, and this will be link 3. So this, and then what we're saying is this represents a navigation, telling the browser this is where I want people to navigate. And again, this is really important for accessibility. It's important for the backgrounds, important for SEO. All these things are critical so that it tells the browser, communicates to the browser what should be happening, like the content. How should we represent your content to the search engines and to accessibility readers? So that's another really, really critical, semantic element. HTML goes on to have other sort of little small elements such as strong. If you want to, I'm moving here to the, actually, I'll do this up here in the paragraph area. So let's say I went to the store, has a strong element, so kind of makes it, bold. It has EM, which is can add emphasis. It has things like that. Has one called mark, which highlights. So again, these are very interesting elements to use. You have I for italics. So this is very good for accessibility and again for emphasis, again for specifying certain things that the content should represent. Now, in CSS is where you can further style these things. Again, these are just the HTML elements that communicate to just say, hey, this is what this should represent. All of this presentational styling you can control in a further course, which I'll show you with CSS, cascading style sheets. So up here, to go back to the head tag, this is where you'll drop in your Google Analytics. This is where you'll have the title. And again, it's not the title of the page that shows, but it's the title that goes into the top browser that also shows up in Google as well. So this is my web page. And if you go on, Chrome, you'll see this presented here at the top. Usually you can see what it's called. And again, that is what sort of comes up in Google. In the search engines, you see the title and description. Here you'll also add meta tags, and meta tags are going to have a bunch of different meta tags that specify certain declarations that, again, there's so many different ones. The most important ones are the title, the meta tag that explains the description, of the web page. Down here is, again, here in the head tag is where you will end up specifying the link to your style sheet that customizes and styles the page, which I'll show you in another course. The script tag down here is where you'll link to scripts, to JavaScripts. Again, over here is where you'll link to your CSS. So after building this web page with whatever content you want, realizing that everything's just going to stack for now, you have what are the building blocks to an HTML web page, the core building blocks. After knowing most of this, and you can dive deeper in HTML and look at some of the other semantic elements and all the little nuances, but these are going to be a large percentage of most of the HTML. And then you're going to want to learn CSS, and which you will link your CSS here. And your CSS is going to specify in each element how every element should look, what should be done with that. And then in your JavaScript, we'll have different interactive functions. That's where you actually code, when someone clicks on something, what should happen? When someone scrolls, what should happen? And before we go off and sign off and conclude this, realize that there's another attribute called ID, which is another form of representing what it should, representing the ID element of the element. Like, what is the ID? It gives it an absolute ID number. And then there's the style, which will represent CSS styling that will go there. But again, this could also be done in a separate style sheet, and we'll cover that in another course. So I hope you've got this, all you need to know with HTML. I hope you've got this down. That this is pretty much most of what you need to know. So if you guys hopefully you enjoyed this, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you want some more content about learning digital and learning web development and getting really into this crazy digital world. Please subscribe and hit that like button. I'll see you in the next one.